Good morning. I'm Dave Mills, and I'm currently the chairperson of the Casey Family Programs Board of Trustees. And I'd like to welcome all of you here in the room and those of you following us on the webcast to this briefing on the Family First Prevention Services Act. When Jim Casey, who was the founder of UPS, first established Casey Family Programs back in 1966, he understood the vital impact that a safe, stable family could have on a child's life and future success. The work of our foundation has always been in pursuit of that goal, that children grow up in a safe, stable family surrounded by supportive communities. We believe that the passage of this Family First Prevention Services Act of 2018 marks a significant step forward for our nation in the way we work with children and families. The legislation provides communities with new opportunities to invest in proven and innovative strategies to strengthen families, keep children safe, and to build hope in their lives. As the nation's largest operating foundation focused solely on safely reducing the need for foster care, Casey Family Programs works directly with child welfare systems in all 50 states, Washington, D.C., 2 territories, and a dozen tribal nations to support efforts that improve the safety and the success of children and families. We also directly serve more than 1,000 children and families involved in the child welfare system, working to ensure that they have the services and the supports that they need to achieve their goals. Today, you're going to have the opportunity to hear from experts on the front lines of improving child safety and family stability. They range from pediatricians and child protection leaders to parents, grandparents, and children who have struggled to overcome challenges in their own lives. Each will provide an important perspective on the Family First Prevention Services Act. I want to thank each one of them for taking time today to share with you their experiences, their expertise, and their insights. And now I'd like to welcome William C. Bell, our President and CEO of Casey Family Programs.
Good morning, and thank you, Dave. I'm William C. Bell, President and CEO of Casey Family Programs, and I would like to thank you all for joining us today, both here in the National Press Club and for those of you who are watching via our webcast. We're here today to help you better understand the Family First Prevention Services Act and the historic opportunity it has created to reshape our approach to child and family safety, stability, and well-being across America. We will have time later to answer your questions about the Family First Act. For those who are watching via webcast, you will be able to take questions remotely via the question box on your viewer. We believe the Family First Act holds the potential to dramatically improve the ability of communities to address the critical challenges affecting the lives of children and families. It will help more children remain safely in their homes, which has been a core principle for child welfare intervention for some time. Most importantly, it is a recognition of something that we have come to understand, that the safety and stability and well-being of children is directly related to the safety and the strength of their families and the conditions of the communities where those families live. The family-centered policies in this act are a significant step forward and build on decades of research, experience, and scientific understandings and the improved outcomes that we've seen over generations. We are at a pivotal moment for children and families in America. The opioid epidemic is having a profound effect on communities across the nation. It is affecting communities, lives, and families, and we've seen the impact of this crisis in virtually every state in this nation. Each year in America, nearly 3.5 million children are involved in investigations of maltreatment. We know that parental substance abuse is a significant factor in child maltreatment cases. About 43% of the children who come into foster care have parental substance abuse as at least one factor as the reason why they enter foster care. Until the Family First Prevention Services Act, our major source of investment in children's lives, Title IV-E, was mostly relegated to purchasing foster care, paying for the services after something has happened to a child. This means that more than $5.3 billion that the federal government spends annually never comes into play until the child has been harmed. And we believe that it's time to move beyond that. The Family First Prevention Services Act has changed that equation. When the Act goes fully into effect in 2019, significant new federal investments will be available to states and tribes to work with families who are struggling so that they can safely raise their children in their own homes, which is what we all know is necessary. If family wasn't so key, we wouldn't be focusing so much on strong families in this nation, and we wouldn't tout how rich, strong families have built this nation. This prevention can take the form of substance abuse treatment, mental health support, parental skills training, and other evidence-based services that can keep more children safe with their family. This shift towards services in the home and community is crucial because it supports a broader array of interventions for families that can be used earlier and more effectively to keep children safe from harm. Research has shown that when parents are able to get into treatment programs with their children in a timely manner, 2/3 of them complete the program compared to only 1/5 who complete programs when the children are not with them. To be clear, the federal investment in foster care will still be there for kids who need to be placed in foster care. This is not an either or, it's a both and. We also know that the opioid crisis has affected more than parents. Today, many extended family members, especially grandparents, have found themselves stepping in to raise children when their parents cannot. There's an estimated 2.6 million grandparents raising grandchildren in America, according to the 2015 census data. The Family First Act also provides new supports for extended family members as well. This is important because research has shown that children who remain with their extended families do better than those who are placed with strangers. The opportunity before us today is profound. But before we take our conversation with the experts, I think it's important for us to hear from folks who have been touched by this system over the years. And so we've invited here to talk with you briefly this morning, people who know what it is like. You know, we talk about the front line as being the service workers. I believe the real front line are the families and the people who touch those families' lives. And so we have with us today Brittany Barros, an alumni from foster care from Michigan. We have Timothy Phipps, a father from Oregon. We have Raven Segura, a mother from Louisiana, and Jan Wagner, a grandparent from Michigan. And I will ask each of them to come to the microphone and respond to a couple of questions that I have for them so that you can actually hear from those who we believe Families First will make a huge difference for people who will follow them in this journey. First, I'd like to start with Timothy. And so as a parent who's been involved in the foster care system and struggled with substance abuse, can you share your own story briefly and tell us how you see Family First Prevention Services Act assisting other parents who are facing the same kinds of challenges you faced?
Thank you, Dr. Bell. Good morning, everyone. My name is Timothy. I had my daughter removed from my care due to substance use disorder, long-standing substance use disorder that I was prepared to deal with. Unfortunately, I wasn't given that opportunity. My daughter was removed from my care before we were able to do that. You know, had we had access to family-based treatment, we could have gone in together and addressed that as a family. You know, my daughter struggled through my addiction as well, and she is in recovery from addiction, from my addiction. That would have been a fantastic opportunity for that. You know, as a youth, I was also in care. I was removed from my family. You know, I wasn't aware that there was a problem in the home. Once I was removed, it became clear that the rest of my family remained in the home. The home was still there. My room was still there. My belongings were still there. But I was the one that was removed. You know, I couldn't help but believe that I was the one that was the problem. And I shouldered the responsibility for that for a lot of years. It impacted my self-esteem, impacted my self-worth, impacted my relationships with people for the rest of my life. You know, had I had the opportunity had my parents had the opportunity to address whatever issues were going on in the home while I was still there, I may not have had to go through decades of self-doubt, issues with self-worth, those types of things. You know, the Family First Prevention Services Act is really gonna offer that opportunity to families to stay together while they address the issues that are facing them. You know, child welfare systems aren't designed to raise children. You know, that privilege and that responsibility falls to the parents, families, and the communities in which we thrive. And Family First will provide for access to services to let that happen.
Thank you, Timothy. And one final question. What is your hope for fathers who will walk those same shoes that you walked in for the future? And what is your hope that Families First would do for them?
My hope is that Family First will be able to provide the supports that fathers need. You know, services that recognize that fathers are nurturing, caring providers for their family. You know, not just financially, but emotionally, you know, spiritually, we can be those kinds of role models in our children's lives. You know, we don't just need to go out and get the job and provide financially for our families. You know, we also want to see what's best for our children. We want their emotional health and well-being to be a priority as well. Services that will be able to support that and nurture that in fathers would be fantastic. That'd be my hope.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it. So next I ask Raven if you will join me. And similarly to the question that I asked Timothy, can you talk to us a bit about how you see Families First helping the system and the challenges that you went through when you were faced with the system?
Thank you and good morning. I'm Raven Tigger. I am the first parent partner of Louisiana. My involvement came from dealing with the state. I had a long substance abuse problem. And at the time, I had given birth to 3 out of 4 of my then 4 children. A case was open. I did not comply. I didn't understand the process of the case plan, even on how to communicate with my worker. Somehow down the line, I did find help. I think it was at rock bottom once my kids were removed. I found and sought help through a community church, a lady that had many ties to the community, and in an instant, within 2 days, helped me find a bed in treatment where I stayed for 1 year and 2 months. There was a waiting list for a lot of things. Parenting, anger management. I feel that if I would have had the access to Family First, I could have had my kids in the home with me. We could have got the necessary counseling we needed within the home, or better yet, find a treatment center where my kids could have came with me, and we could have dealt through this issue together. Instead, my kids were separated, 3 different homes for 4 children. Their bond was broken. We all got the necessary treatment and counseling that we needed, but we were aliens to each other once we were back together. And that took a lot for a parent. I think the necessary, the act, just the meaning of Family First says a lot today. It keeps fun. Like I said, my kids were all in 3 different separate homes. I think with Family First, my kids could have stayed at least in their home, our home, and had a family relative caregiver come into their home. That way they still had their same schools, their same house, their same friends. And that's what I hope today for the families that I serve. They don't have to endure of their families being broken up like mine had to go through.
Thank you, Ray. And so you ended with a hope for families. Anything else you want to say about your hope for the future for mothers or people who might find themselves in your same situation?
Yes. The Family First provide resources and funding back into these small communities to assist the families and stop removal, prevent unnecessary placements in foster care for children at imminent risk of being removed by providing funding and assistance to relatives. The potential to create stronger families by keeping them together while they receive the necessary services and tools to better their family.
Thank you, Raven. You know, I mentioned earlier about grandparents and the enormous task that they take on in stepping in for their children and raising their children's children. And I testified earlier this year on the HELP committee about the opioid crisis, and I was reminded of the crack epidemic and how it impacted New York City, where I was in the 80s. And we even created a term called skip generational parenting. And it was one of the first big efforts around grandparents stepping in and raising grandchildren. And still to this day, there are nearly 3 million grandparents who are still doing that for children. And I think that it's important that we acknowledge that the impact of epidemics is not just on the parents of the children or the children of those parents, but it's a family challenge. And so I'd invite Jan to come to the podium at this point. And I'd ask you if you could tell us a little bit about your experience and how you think the Act provides new resources and supports for extended family members in your position.
Sure. Good morning. When I was 57 years old, I became the legal primary caregiver and guardian of my then 2-year-old grandson. His mother was addicted to opiate painkillers. I like to think you would describe it as being a legal addict because she received these painkillers from a clinic. Her abuse of the medication and the accompanying lifestyle made it impossible for her to parent such a young child. We knew that he would be safer if we took him in to our home, where he was familiar and comfortable and loved already. But we soon realized that he had also suffered some trauma effects from his early childhood when he was with her. And he required some special services that my husband and I were having a very difficult time providing on our own. What we couldn't understand was through our early intervention of bringing him into our home rather than letting him go into foster care would make him ineligible for any of the support services that were generally out there and offered to other families whose children were in traditional care. For kinship families like ours, there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of confusion trying to find the access to these services on their own. It becomes overwhelming and daunting, and oftentimes we become very lost. Kinship Navigator programs and the funding that is going to be provided for that will make a large part of helping these families like ours being able to find these services, gain the information they need to help provide for the children in their care to give them a healthy and a productive future. When they live with a grandparent or other close relative, there's nothing that says that the effects of early childhood experiences goes away. It doesn't. Past trauma can't be loved enough to make it go. It takes patience, it takes work, hard work. It takes professional intervention, and it takes a lot of training. Addressing the barriers to licensing relatives as foster parents would provide federal funding for resources such as the Kinship Navigator to help get caregivers the information and the resources that they need for the health and safety and well-being of their children. We adopted Holden after being with us for 4 years. He's an active, happy, healthy 12-year-old. He pushes our buttons. He holds our hearts. And oftentimes he holds us as his very, very willing hostage. He's a complete work in progress, and so are we. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And finally, what is your hope for grandparents who will face what you faced because of Families First?
When we started out with my grandson, there were no readily available informational services. The Kinship Navigator programs that were released 10 years ago were only in a few states, and we were left to find all of these services all on our own. What my hope is that families will now be able to make a one-stop call to ask for help, to ask for guidance, and to ask for resources. I also look very forward to having the entire family prevention services provided. It would have been, I guess when I look at the disease of addiction or substance abuse, what I have to realize and what I need to explain is that it's a family disease, and the entire family needs help, and the entire family needs treatment. And I look at these preventive services as a lot of hope to have reached my biological child, my husband and I, and also to help my grandson, Holden.
Thank you, Jen. And finally, Brittany, who spent time in foster care in the state of Michigan. You've gone from being in foster care to advocating on behalf of youth in foster care. How do you see the Families First Act changing how we ensure the safety and well-being of families?
Yes, good morning. My name is Brittany Barros. I'll start off with my story. So I was in foster care not once, but twice. My mom had me taken away, and she finally regained custody. But unfortunately, a tragic incident happened, and we became homeless, and my mother once struggled again with substance abuse addiction. And the Family First Act, if it was implemented during my time in care, it definitely could have helped us be able to stay together. My mom could have had mental health services, addiction treatment, parental skill building, and it could have offered me even more support as an alumni for foster youth. These 5 years of being in foster care was honestly the most traumatic and hardest part of my life. I bounced around from group home to foster home, where I was also abused in some of them. I had to watch my mom face addiction basically alone by herself, and I've been separated from my family for my siblings for about 5 years. I still to this day dream about being reunified with my siblings. And what I want the Family First to do is to end the trauma before it begins. I look at foster care as a ripple effect of life adversities, and the Family First Act can prevent this ripple effect from even happening, from it having to occur to begin with. And that is my hope for the Family First Act.
Thank you. She anticipated my last question. Is there anything else that you would like to say about your hope for the children who will come after you?
Yes, definitely. You know, in my lifetime, this may be a hopeful goal, but I hope to see an end to foster care one day. I hope to see all families reunified with one another. I hope to watch parents beat drug addiction. I hope to watch families end poverty and to be reunified, because that's what young people deserve, is a loving family. And that's what the Family First Act will help provide through federal support. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. And thank each of you for sharing your life with us. You know, I know that you're often called upon to talk about your history, and we are hopeful that Families First opens the door for so many of us to start talking about our futures and let our history be history, and that we can move on and live the kinds of lives that we all deserve to have. Thank you so much for sharing with us this morning. And now I'd like to invite to the podium to facilitate our expert panel, Dr. David Sanders, who is the Executive Vice President for Systems Improvement at Casey Family Programs, and a longtime executive in the child welfare system, both in Hennepin County and in Los Angeles County. Dr. Sanders.
Thank you very much. Thank you, William. I'm pleased to facilitate this discussion, especially after the very moving presentation from our constituents. And as a reminder, if you're watching the webcast, you're able to send us questions by clicking on the link in your viewer. To get us started, I'm going to ask each of our panel members a question. First, Dr. Lisa Zetley, the American Academy of Pediatrics, has been deeply interested in Family First Act and the opioid epidemic. Can you tell us how you see this act affecting families and children you work with in Wisconsin, as well as nationally, and why the approaches the act supports are important?
Thank you. I want to just thank Casey for the opportunity to be here today and for to be a part of this really important informational session about Family First. As a pediatrician, I see firsthand how the trauma of parental substance use can impact children and their health, their development, and their well-being. The American Academy of Pediatrics strongly supports Family First because its reform means that more families affected by the opioid crisis can remain together safely with treatment services for families, for children, and for those that surround them. Family First is a seismic shift in child welfare policy and promotes evidence-based therapies, which are really critical to assuring that needs are met. In Wisconsin, Children's Hospital of Wisconsin is one of the largest service providers for children and families in the area of family preservation and support, child advocacy, and foster care. And we are excited about the opportunity to partner with our state to implement Family First and to support more children and families in this endeavor.
Thank you. Let me go next to Glenn Castle. Glenn, as a service provider of both child welfare and health services, tell us how you see the Family First Act impacting the families you work with in Central Florida, and what will it mean for service providing organizations like yours?
Thank you, David. Community-based care of Central Florida is one of the lead foster care agencies in Florida, and we have had the privilege to be at the foreground of the philosophical shift that now is afforded our nation, an opportunity to turn our minds from a system that has paid for only foster care and then wondered why all we get is more foster care. We have had the opportunity to see the kind of change that can happen in families, to be inspired the way you see parents, children, relatives overcome their challenges together and find safety, permanency, and opportunity the way all of us would dream for our own families. At CBC of Central Florida over the last 12 years, as we have helped to be one of the test sites to the kind of well-balanced, family-driven systems that Families First now provides in our country. We've seen fewer kids in foster care. We've seen more families together. We've seen an explosion of interventions and opportunity for children to be with their family, and all the while, more safe and more opportunity. The fears that have plagued so many of us in foster care over the years don't develop. If you lead families together, they'll be in danger. Bad things will happen. Turns out that's generally not true. And I've heard from too many of our children, the way you just heard a few minutes ago, I'd have rather stayed with my family. So don't we owe it to our communities and to our families to have an opportunity to stay together? And don't we have an obligation to try everything we can and use foster care as a last resort when all other options have been exhausted? I believe Families First provides that opportunity, and I think we owe it to our community, to our children and their families, to take that opportunity. Some of the fear that has paralyzed us, it is time for us to let go. And as one of the providers that we believe has helped to lay a framework for this opportunity, we look forward to what comes ahead.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Brenda Donald, as a child welfare leader here in Washington, D.C., and as well as nationally, can you tell us what the Family First Act will mean for the direction of your agency and how you approach child safety and family support? And also, how will this shape the field of child protection?
Great. Thank you, David. And thanks for convening us here to talk about this. And also, thank you so much to the previous panel of constituents for reminding us why we do the work that we do. And I agree with Brittany. I'm trying to work myself out of a job. Here in the District of Columbia, we have been really focused over the last several years and have taken up the mantle from Casey Family Programs to safely reduce the number of children in foster care and to move from a system or an agency that focuses on children in foster care to one that supports families in the communities. I'm really proud of the work that we've done, and we've reduced, we beat your challenge, Casey Family Programs, and we've reduced the number of kids in care by over 75% and have shifted more to serving those families and stabilizing families in the community. So now about 65% of the children that we care for are with their families. And largely we've been able to do that. We were one of the 30 states or so that took advantage of the federal 4E waiver. And I think it's important to say that in the context of Family First. If you have more than half of the states pursuing and going for a waiver to give them the opportunity for flexible funding to focus on prevention and family stabilization, then something obviously was wrong with the financing for foster care, and that to have the dollars tied to children in foster care just was going in the wrong direction. We were a little nervous, quite frankly, with the ending of the waiver, which occurs in this next year, with what would come next, and are encouraged now by the Family First legislation that I can see really clearly how we can wind down the reliance on the waiver, but to take advantage of Family First in terms of continuing the focus on community-based prevention, working with our families who struggle with the most pressing problems, reaching into promising and best practices so that we get the best results. So we are really encouraged about the opportunities for Family First. I'm excited. We're going to launch a whole new community prevention planning process because, as I often say, we are the child welfare agency. We're not the child welfare system. And that includes so many others, including our pediatricians who see many more kids than we will ever see and have the opportunity to help us intervene and reach families earlier.
Thank you very much, Brenda. I'm going to open it up now to questions from the media. First, see if there's any questions from anybody in the room. If not, Danny, do you have any questions from the webcast audience?
I do. A couple questions so far. And this is directed to all the panelists. If we were to fast forward 5 years, what impact would you like to have seen from the implementation of Family First?
I'm happy to go first. Again, working my way out of a job. I really hope that we in the District of Columbia would have created a real strong safety net where we are further and further upstream, knowing that our community and other partners are coming together to support families. As I said, we have about 65% of the families we support are in the community. I'd like to see that go to 75, 80%, and that the children in foster care are only there for a temporary time to protect them in terms of their safety while we help their families to heal. And I think the Family First legislation will allow us to go down that pathway.
I have one additional comment, and that is a reminder that more children are removed from their parents in America for neglect than for abuse. And you don't have to know anything about foster care to think, that doesn't sound right. What that means is that we have failed to provide opportunities for families in crisis to heal and find a pathway to success. There are people who are dangerous and endanger their children. We cloud ourselves to those crises by serving as a final catch to a whole filled safety net. I'd like to see Families First provide an opportunity for child welfare agencies to strengthen that safety net and work together with community, including lots of other partners. I appreciate, Brenda, you mentioning that, to wrap around our children and their families and provide opportunity for them to stay together and reserve foster care for those instances where it's absolutely necessary. That's what I'd like to see.
It's important to recognize that as a pediatrician, you're right. We see children often, especially in their first few years of life. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recognizes the importance of that early bond, that attachment between a child and a parent. And because we have the trust of the parent, oftentimes we learn of things that are stressful to the family, or there's early problems that to develop. And what I'd like to see 5 years from now is that pediatricians partner with child welfare, but really partner with our community agencies to help them understand the importance of child development and help us understand how to access resources early for children and families to prevent that toxic stress and that trauma of removal. Because as we all know, removing a child from their home is traumatic for the child and for the parent. And so I'd really like to see, as you said, an upstream approach to be able to access services for children and families, really understanding the core is that if a child's health and mental health and development is successful, that really builds confidence in the parent and makes them feel like they're doing well, and that helps them with their healing.
Great, thank you. One more question from our webcast. Why now? In your opinion, why did the Family First Prevention Services Act pass in 2018? What change made this possible?
I mean, there's been a lot of work over the years, Casey Family Programs and other national organizations really pushing against this restrictive federal financing that's tied to kids in foster care. And so the recognition that that needed to change. The 4E waiver program was one opportunity for that, but there were clear indications that that was not going to continue. And so I think there are the influence, the education, the research, all that shows that prevention is better, it's certainly cheaper, and that we have to find a different way to use those precious federal resources for communities to step it up. I think also that child welfare systems across the country really have moved a long way from being the scary places that people look at, as taking their children, but more realizing that we're here to support families and we just need the resources to do that. So I think there was the confluence of everything coming together, and we're glad that the timing is now so that there's not a gap from the end of the waiver to going back to the old way, because we don't want to do that.
If I can just emphasize, Brenda, your point about the influence of the waiver in the old design across the country that allowed sort of those communities that were willing to be a leader, be an innovator, away from this one-size-fits-all approach, provided, I think, to that timing. And I applaud Casey for really gathering that influence and gathering the lessons learned from those experiments. And I look forward, candidly, to the opportunity to now be that innovative leader inside the new flexibility of Families First. And I'm sure I have at least one colleague here in DC who will come with us. Across the country, we need to continue to push this envelope. Families First is an enormous step forward, but it's not the answer. It's not the final solution. And so we need to make that transition seamless and then forge ahead to say, how can we do better for our kids, our families, and our community?
I'd like to just add that I think we have a greater understanding now about early childhood development and about the importance of the growing brain and the importance of those early relationships between children and their parents. And as we grow in that knowledge and we get better at developing evidence-based services, we really understand that it is incredibly traumatic to take a child away from their parent. And it's incredibly traumatic for that parent as well. I think of the birth of a child as a sentinel event in the life of a parent. And the opportunity to look in that child's eyes and have that child look back at you and really be able to develop that bond early is so critical. And so to be able to support that bond and support children and families through those years of struggle and trials and sleepless nights and teething and sickness and behavior troubles and temper tantrums, and to be able to recognize that everyone needs something a little bit different, but that we can help. I think that's now is the time, because we really understand the importance of development of a child and the value of keeping children and families together.
Thank you. I believe we have a question in the audience.
Yes. Can the panel address how some of those evidence-based programs you mentioned, how Family First can help change the way we're responding to the opioid crisis?
So some of the evidence-based practices that we have experience with in Wisconsin at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin include parent-child interactive therapy. And that is a program where a parent is coached in their skills to better parent based on the child's needs. So when you have a parent who has a substance use disorder, it may be difficult for them to necessarily read the child's cues if they're in recovery themselves and they're anxious or they're nervous. And so this sort of is like parent coaching, and it's a really wonderful model. It's evidence-based, and it provides great outcomes for children who may have a bit of atypical behaviors, or even typical behaviors, and the parent just doesn't know how to respond. So that's just one example of an evidence-based practice that I think could be successful.
I'd like to add a little different context to the role of evidence-based programs and services as the country now shifts under Families First into that space, in a more organized way into that space, is that they become tools in our toolbox. So just like our friends in the healthcare industry, this is not a one-size-fits-all. And so what we need are tools in that toolbox to adapt to 1 million different examples of 1 million different families and scenarios, each one unique with their own set of circumstances, and therefore a unique set of solutions for them. We need those tools in our toolbox. We need to recognize them, they need to be proven, and then we need to apply them locally based on the needs of individual children and their families. And so the only caution that I would have is not to see this as a one-size-fits-all, but an opportunity to bring a diverse set of tools into our toolbox so that family by family, child by child, we're able to provide the right service at the right time. That's really the goal.
Excellent, thank you. I know we have one question here. I'm going to just fit in one online question from Adams County, Colorado. How is Family First going to identify what it means to be at risk of foster care to open eligibility of the prevention services? Does this still require abuse neglect allegations?
We're really encouraged. Casey convened a meeting a couple of weeks ago with waiver states and invited officials from Health and Human Services who are providing the guidance around this legislation. And they are open to and encouraging states to help them to define what that means. I think there's some nervousness when we first read the legislation that the definitions may be too prescriptive or too narrow, but the Children's Bureau recognizes and really supports the focus on prevention and wants that to be able to have the services and resources that Family First will support to be applied to a really broad range or a broad group of people who might be likely to come to the attention of child welfare. So they've asked us, what does that mean? What does the data say? Who's in our systems now, and how would we help to define what those definitions are? So we're excited about that, and we're responding, and feel that the identification of people who are likely to come to the attention of the Child Welfare Agency can be written much broader than I think we initially thought.
I think it's important to remember as one of those communities, one of those agencies that has walked through this change over the last 10 or 15 years, that we move from where you stand. And so you've got to turn much more like a dimmer switch than a light switch, because the consequence are children and their families in between. And so Families First provides a dramatic opportunity for us to turn. That needs to happen community by community. As Brenda mentioned, we need flexible work with our partners at the federal level to allow our communities to make those shifts. But there's a responsibility in that shift, and I think that that's one of those exciting opportunities inside Families First, but comes with a caution to do that responsibly and really think through that change, because there are children's lives hanging in the balance.
There's a question in the audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear what you guys thought about peer-to-peer support, similar to an AA model of peers helping peers, so parents helping parents. And do you see an opportunity for that to expand, or how you're using it currently in your system?
Right, I'm very excited. We have a parent-peer unit that we just established a few months ago in the District of Columbia. I have 5 parents who formerly had their children in foster care and successfully reunified. Their job, and they are full-time paid employees with benefits, their job is to train our their job is to train our social workers, to work with our foster parents, and to do shared parenting, because that's another thing that we're doing, is that when children have to go into foster care, their parents still know the most about them. They know what they need to, go comfort them to go to sleep at night, or what their favorite food is, or what scares them. And so getting parents together with the birth parents to help support that child. So I'm very excited about that. I do think that there's, the implications in Family First would allow for that, and we'll be happy to share our model as we roll it out with other states.
Yeah, our experience is very similar, and maybe I would try to express that upon you by the folk that sat here before we did. I was hanging at each word, inspired by their story and by their strength. It's very much a representation of why I do this work, why I've personally committed a profession to this endeavor. It all comes from the individual experience, the individual pieces of hope and perseverance that are inspiring. And so to build that lens into your foster care system, why on earth not? And so as an agency, similarly, we have embraced the involvement of those that have been touched by foster care throughout our organization. It's embedded in our programs, it's embedded in our staff, and candidly embedded in my board of directors as part of who we are, because isn't that who we are?
Looks
Great,
like
we
there's
have,
another question, and actually I want to close out with a question too, but there's a question back there.
Thanks. Similarly, I was wondering if you think Families First will also offer you an opportunity to work more collaboratively with court and judicial personnel from that side of the system.
I think it's very important to partner with courts and judicial system to help them understand child development, the attachment, the relationship between children and families and their parents. I think I've seen firsthand the challenges and the strife that happens during removal and substance use disorder parents who are trying their hardest and yet are unable to access the resources. And so courts that are courts for early childhood courts or specialty courts that are for what we call in Wisconsin family drug treatment courts. Those are wonderful opportunities to really be able to provide support to the parent and understand the need for the child's development to be played as a role in terms of visitation, reunification, and really what you said, sort of co-parenting when the child does have to be removed from care. So those specialty courts, I think, are a really wonderful opportunity.
The family-based approach really changes the relationship that the foster care agencies have with the court system. And it has been, they have been an invaluable partner in that shift, but I would be remiss not to point out that it is a difficult change. So in a foster care only, when foster care is the intervention, you go to court first. There aren't a lot of places in our country where it's normal to go straight to court. Usually there's all sorts of other things you try if you have a disagreement with somebody before you end up in court. Foster care is a court-first environment right now. When you add other family interventions, other community-based interventions with kids and families, it changes the role that the court has. And it was critical for us to do that together, to work as partners in that shift, so that we weren't leaving the judicial system out of the foster care change.
Great.
Any other webcast questions, Danny? Okay, great. I'd like to close out with a question for each of you. Both Brenda and Glenn, you mentioned waivers, and clearly DC and Florida have been very active with waivers. Can you say just briefly what your waiver was about? And could you say a little about what you learned in the waiver that you hope will be applied to Family First?
Yes, thank you. Our waiver focused primarily on prevention and really building out our community-based services so that we could have, again, the family support and fewer kids in foster care. What we learned, and Glenn alluded to this in his comments about how we hope to help shape this legislation so that it works for each community, is that we selected several evidence-based practices that clearly by their definition worked in other places, didn't work as well here. And that they were too narrow, the requirements too stringent, families weren't able to participate for the length of time. They sounded good and made sense to matching the needs of our families. We are going to have, so what's going to help us now is to really look in a different way how we vet what are the right services for our families and to have a bigger toolkit of resources so that we can tailor them to the needs of our families. We're not running away from evidence-based. We want to invest in what works, of course. We just want to make sure that our families who need those services can benefit and that we're not in too narrow a box. And so that's an important lesson. And as we go into the planning process for Family First, that's one of the things that we're going to be working on early.
Thank you.
Florida has had a waiver that really was system change. It's statewide utilization of the traditional Title IV-E waiver, and has so dramatically changed our approach to one that really tries to work with families that if you look at Florida's expenditures today, only 42% of those expenditures would qualify under traditional IV-E. And so the impact of Families First for us comes at a critical junction, for sure, but also I think has helped to show us how foster care systems can change. The number of children in Florida's foster care system overall has dropped dramatically. The number of adoptions has increased. The percentage of children served in foster care versus with their families has shifted dramatically. And so that's tremendous. That has been a tremendous lesson for us in Florida, and I think helps to show that it can be done. Important to note that one way that Florida, recognized as one of those big states, has done this is by breaking the state into smaller pieces. I had somebody say to me one time a number of years ago, it seems like the smaller states do better than some of the larger states as it relates to foster care. I think part of that secret sauce is it should be small. Communities know better than somewhere far off, and children are better served seen with names and faces than as files and thousands. And I think part of the experience that Florida's waiver has produced for us is that in community, the opportunity to serve families, the opportunity to work around the other resources in your community works. It pays dividends.
Thank you. And Dr. Zetley, I'm going to close with you. We had a chance to talk just briefly about some of your thinking about where physicians can be in this issue around child abuse and neglect. Can you say a little about some of the tools that will be offered under Family First, specifically for physicians, and what kind of role physicians might play in safety for children moving into the future?
Thank you. Well, I think it's important to note that because pediatricians see children often, and we do developmental screening and behavioral screening at all well child check exams, and we also counsel patients and families and ask how things are going, we are able to really early identify behavior, I'll say, challenges before they become behavior problems. And it's really critical to support parents at those early stages of when there is a mismatch between what a parent's expectation is and what a child is able to do or is developmentally ready to do. And if we can intervene early on, I think we can then better educate parents and families and support them to prevent that additional stress that can really take place. That really escalates the challenges and can really lead to greater problems within the family. I think it's also important to know that as pediatricians, we will continue to partner with our child welfare partners and really help to understand where we can play a bigger role in really identifying children and families at risk and partnering together to be able to assure that those needs are met.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to close by thanking all of the speakers today. Certainly the constituents with their stories were very moving, very compelling, and the panel that just presented have great detail about the impact of Family First, and particularly related to the opioid crisis. And thank you to all the members of the media who took the time today to learn more about the Act. We hope this has been helpful. We'll be happy to follow up with anyone who would like to take a deeper dive. You'll find a contact list in the packet we shared with you and on email. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks, everybody. We're concluded.
You guys were awesome. Yes.